Fishing for delicate and soft princesses plus stable prime minister in power+Sweet pet, double cleanliness, face slapping, comfortable article 1v1 plus all members of the group are fans of tens of thousands of people. Shen Wanshu is the most beautiful princess in the capital city, raised in a deep palace, delicate and pitiful. Upon awakening, she realized that she was a malicious princess living in a storybook. Not long after, the imperial brother will disregard the country and cannot extricate himself from falling in love with the female protagonist of the storybook, and she will constantly target the female protagonist, which will make people dislike her. The succession of imperial power resulted in her brother being taken away from the throne, and she also fell into a quagmire. From then on, the pearl of a country was surrounded and humiliated by wolves, disgusted by her unruly and vicious behavior, and coveted her appearance. In the storybook, the one who was most cruel to her, even killing other ferocious beasts to snatch her back, was the Prime Minister Pei Yingyan, who covered the sky with all his might. Pei Yingyan was the leader of the four great aristocratic families in power. He feared and admired the existence in the capital, and the dynasties rose and fell, controlling the court and holding high positions of power. She, who woke up from her dream, will definitely not let herself repeat the same mistake. But it was discovered that the tigers and wolves lurking in the dark in the storybook had re-entangled with her in a new way. The jackal was in front, the fierce tiger was behind, and Jiang Wanshu had no choice but to retreat. Unexpectedly, the plot of the story came to mind again. She only wanted to survive, so she leaned onto the Prime Minister's thigh. But she never expected that she would never escape his grasp again. The princess of Guanyan Capital was henceforth swept back to her golden nest by a fierce beast. Later, everyone looked at the man dressed in a black python court uniform, clearly a noble and powerful official, but bent down and approached her. "There is a hysterical madness in the bottom of my eyes, princess, don't look at them, just at me, okay?" So humble, willing to be a subordinate. Only Jiang Wanshu understood how fierce and reckless the esteemed Prime Minister was in the eyes of outsiders. Chapter 1. The Awakening of Princess Huaben. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The night is thick and thick. The incense in the hall is like smoke. The two of them intertwined on the bed, their breath burning hot. The beautiful woman's beautiful pupils sparkle with water vapor, and her fair cheeks are dyed with a light crimson color, captivating the soul. Don't. Heat. It has melted. Shen Wanshu's pupils narrowed, and her hair was wet with fragrant sweat, both seductive and delicate. I wanted to get up and dodge, but was forcefully pressed into my tough chest. She was held in the arms of a man as noble as a mountain. The clothes are messy, revealing the skin that has been pampered to a tender and smooth texture. Ink-thick and wet hair wraps around the white neck, the waist is like a weak willow, and the body is graceful and delicate. The brocade tent was in disarray, and a tall figure covered the lower half of the candlelight, trapping this delicate and soft body beneath it. Men have a cold temperament, sharp and handsome facial features, and are full of dangerous aggression. Looking down at the scene in front of me, listening to the indescribable sound of broken sobs. Through the bed curtain, the man's profile was as cold as jade, and his eyes hidden in the dim light flickered with coldness. It is the most exquisite appearance, like a beautiful moon and a graceful branch, steady and elegant. But his gaze was commanding, giving off a sense of fear. Thick dangerous fluctuations. The white wrist was slender and fair, covered by a large palm with blue veins and distinct joints. Immediately after, the scorching kiss fell like a gust of wind and rain. "Are you afraid of me, The hot panting accompanied by a light smile echoed in her ear, whispering softly. The tone is mixed with profound emotions that cannot be expressed clearly and the way is unclear. Perhaps she had never experienced such hardships before, but Shen Wanshu's eyes turned red and she retreated in shock. Her crow-colored long eyelashes flickered, and her ears and cheeks were tinged with a rich and ambiguous red. No. I originally wanted to scold, but the outlet was already brewing Jiaoman. The man pursed his thin lips and his slender fingers gently caressed her face, like a gentle knife. A low magnetic voice sounded, and the man's pitch-black eyes carried a surging chill. "Princess, your foolish brother is no longer here, no one will affect us anymore." A cry of grievance overflowed, and the person in their arms shook their head repeatedly. The man's chest felt like a vortex, completely engulfing her. The veil was graceful, and a lotus arm stained with cinnabar plum slipped off. She was pulled back by another strong hand, her fingers interlocked, making her unable to move properly. Shen Wanshu was so hot that she almost lacked oxygen. At this moment, the man held the soft and white hand of the person in his arms. The scorching thin lips imprinted on her wrist. Kissed her skin inch by inch. The tone was a smile rather than a smile, with scrutiny from superiors. "Your Highness, Royal Highness Princess, you are mine now." In the next moment, strands of agarwood completely surrounded her. The remnants of dye white, and the spring color fills the bed. "Oh, it's so hot, it's not good anymore. The princess has a fever. Quickly pull up the curtain, don't let out the wind, and bring some cold water to cool down." Shen Wanshu felt her head groggy and her ears were filled with noisy sounds. She had a high fever that persisted and had an extremely terrifying nightmare. That dream, it's really too long, too real. Like a vine piercing deep in her heart, it spreads rapidly. I don't know how long it has been, but her body temperature finally returned to normal. "The princess is awake, hurry up, bring the brocade handkerchief." Shen Wanshu woke up from her dream, her eyes filled with panic and a sense of water. As soon as I opened my eyes, I saw the palace maid guarding her sleeping room, looking at her with concern on her face. Shen Wanshu's eyes were flushed, her throat was sore, and her heart was trembling. Did she wake up from a dream? All the real details in her dream made her absurdly believe, she actually lives in a storybook. In the development of the future story of the storybook, Emperor Shen Huaijin is infatuated with the female protagonist Chen Yaoyao. The imperial brother disbanded the harem for her, played tricks on the feudal lords for her, and acted recklessly in court for her. The Great Wei dynasty was filled with chaos for a while, and even the powerful officials couldn't laugh. At that time, Pei Yingyan, the prime minister who held the power of the four major aristocratic families and even the imperial power of the world, was the one who disregarded the power of his elder brother's court. He brought down the foolish ruler and united with the power of all directions to support the new emperor's succession. The female protagonist of the story retreated peacefully. Because the new emperor also admired her, he inherited everything. So the female protagonist of the storybook returned to being the legitimate daughter of the Ministry of Rights attendant, Xianjin, and remained the embroiderer of the boudoir. Simply put, it revolves around the dazzling female protagonist of the storybook. The new emperor is the male lead of the story. But in the storybook, she is a malicious princess who targets the female protagonist everywhere. Although indulging in softness and being pampered, growing up with infamy, my heart is like a snake and scorpion. If the grudges end here. But the female protagonist complained that her foolish imperial brother forcibly took her into the palace. So much so that I hated her actions and gave her chronic poison without any antidote. She also shared her grievances in the palace with the new emperor. From then on, her ending laid the groundwork. And in the end, the reckless princess was set up and fell into the mud, about to be humiliated by the wolves. It was Pei Yingyan who came to kill them and took her away. But she was extremely afraid of such a dangerous and imposing prime minister, and shuddered. If those dreams were really her direction in this life, Shen Wanshu's eyes flickered over the dark color, frowning. She doesn't believe in fate, she's not the kind of foolish person who does bad things and shows off. After regaining her senses, she wiped away the sweat from her forehead, pursed her lips, and gradually recovered her body. "Your Highness, Royal Highness Princess, is your nightmare coming? The Jiaoman sleeping hall is warm and fragrant. The maid lifted the bed curtain and anxiously wiped the fine sweat on the back of the beautiful woman's neck, realizing that her hands were cold. "Xiaocui, bring the warm lady quickly, don't let the princess freeze her body." Several palace maids on both sides of the bed curtains lowered their heads and added charcoal to the charcoal pot, holding their breath and concentrating, afraid that the princess's body would freeze. A maid dressed in peach-colored clothes hurriedly held the warm lady and skillfully stuffed her into the princess's arms. Xiaocui frowned and said, "Princess, this winter is particularly cold and piercing. You must be careful not to catch a cold and not to burn it again." The silver charcoal inside the house burned fiercely, while the heavy snow drifted outside. The palace maids dare not look at the princess too much. That face and body are too delicate. Chapter 2. Hongmen Shura Banquet. You are listening at novel.full.audio. A curvaceous figure that even women cannot bear to look directly at. Take another look, your mind will sway and your heart will itch. After a while, everyone heard a very soft response. A palace maid remembered the rumors about the princess's appearance in the past and quietly raised her head to look over. The beautiful woman sitting on the bed had tired eyebrows and eyes, wearing a luxurious crimson-red train skirt. The nose is greasy with goose fat, and a pair of white and tender ankles are exposed outside the brocade quilt. The waist is tight, the chest is plump, and the cheeks are slightly red from the heat, but one can still see the pampered. Born with icy flesh and jade bones. Shen Wanshu still had residual redness at the end of her eyes, her black eyelashes trembled lightly, she looked up at the words, her voice was soft, and her thin pink lips curved. "Xiaocui, Wanmei, how long did I sleep in this palace?" She remembered that her brother had indeed fallen in love with a woman in a portrait during this period, and ordered people to pay more attention everywhere. But she didn't care, she just felt the sudden appearance of the portrait. The true unfolding was at the birthday banquet of the imperial brother. Shen Wanshu knew from the beginning that it was not a coincidence. That portrait was clearly intentionally sent into the palace and was also tainted with addictive spices. She didn't care about how the noblewomen would win the favor of the imperial brothers, and even wanted to avoid it after learning about the plot. But upon careful consideration, why can't she live for herself if her existence is just a supporting actress who sets off the female lead in the storybook? Why do you want to avoid? Is she just a princess who can't compare to the daughter of an official? She knew that the female lead in her dream script was very popular. It seems like there is some kind of magic, as long as you see her once, you will develop admiration for her. She was still talking about a pair of people for the rest of her life, causing both the imperial brother and the new emperor to become crazy about her, deposing the virtuous empress, and setting up an empty harem. The city is truly the protagonist of the storybook. Shen Wanshu slowly took off the handkerchief on her forehead. Wanmei took the handkerchief and lowered her head to answer lightly. "Princess, you have been sleeping all day. Tomorrow is your Majesty's birthday banquet." Xiaocui was worried about the princess's health and said cautiously. "Princess, your body is just right. It's not necessary to go to this birthday banquet, why not? Princess Shen Wanshu has great privileges in the palace, granted by the former emperor. As long as she doesn't want to, no one can force her to participate in banquets she doesn't like." Shen Wanshu shook her head, her bright and charming eyes flickered, and she pinched the flesh in her palm. If that dream is true, she would rather know about the powerful officials and lords that appeared in the storybook for a while. We also need to live a new life and not lead to the tragic ending in the storybook. With this in mind, her tense back relaxed slightly. The body of this palace is safe and sound. The birthday of the imperial brother is a big event, so we cannot avoid going. The girl's voice is soft and melodious, with a unique charm. Shen Wanshu is not an evasive person. Once used to pride, she is a princess of a country and will not back down. Even if there are wolves in front and tigers in the back. "How is Wanshu's health?" Suddenly, a deep voice came from outside the porch, pulling Shen Wanshu's consciousness back. Through the hazy veil, the man could vaguely see the figure of the imperial sister. The spring clothes are thin, and the forehead and temples are moist. Although they may appear pale after a serious illness, they are even more gorgeous and colorful. Like a delicate flower that has been washed away by rain and bent over, it is both unrestrained and flamboyant. But Shen Wanshu couldn't appreciate it because he knew that the character of this flower was difficult to discern. The palace maids in both rows held their breath and lowered their heads without looking at the dragon's face. Xiaotsui whispered, "Princess, your Majesty is here." Shen Wanshu nodded and then felt a majestic gaze fall on her face. She squinted her eyes. In her bizarre dreams, and also on the day after she had a fever, the imperial brother came to visit her and asked her to rest. The day after, the female protagonist was forcibly brought into the palace by her imperial brother. Everything that happened in the dream was clearly staged in front of her. "Wanshu, I heard that you have caught a cold wind, but your body is still in trouble. If you still feel unwell, let's rest for a few more days." The man lifted the curtain and spoke calmly. Shen Wanshu lifted her head. The man who caught the eye had dignified and handsome facial features, high black hair and jade belt, wearing a bright imperial robe, and a jade pendant tied around his waist. This is her future imperial brother who will become addicted to women and be incompetent in politics. Shen Wanshu concealed her thoughts, gently twisted her eyebrows, bit her pale lips, and looked at her brother, her eyes slightly moist. "Pretend to be very self-blaming. Brother, I have already recovered. Don't worry about me. As a younger sister, why don't you go to your birthday banquet tomorrow?" Huang Mei appeared so weak that Shen Wanshu couldn't say anything more. "I just twisted my eyebrows and felt slightly displeased. Today, this imperial sister has changed somewhere." Perhaps he had never known this rare imperial sister since the death of the former emperor. She has always been raised by the late emperor in the deep palace. She is a noble woman in the capital who is curious, and a pearl who grew up in a pile of colorful decorations. Due to her dislike of frequent appearances in front of outsiders, she cannot take advantage of her serious illness and demand that he accompany her more. Relying on his arms to act coquettishly, even refusing to attend. His imperial sister is beautiful, but she is too arrogant and ignorant of the world, and lacks patience. Simply put, it is foolish, cowardly, and unreasonable. It's hard to say if I would just leave the crowded occasion halfway through. He doesn't like this personality, nor does he like her clinging to him. In contrast, he prefers those who are cunning and have spiritual energy. A clear and beautiful face gradually came to mind. I hope tomorrow's imperial sister won't embarrass him. Shen Wanshu stared at her elder brother's face and for a moment, she concealed her thoughts and opened her lips, chuckling lightly. Brother, if there's nothing to do, let's leave first. Sister wants to go take a shower later, so I won't embarrass you tomorrow. I won't disturb you. After Shen Wanshu nodded and showed concern, she hid her impatience and turned around to leave. Shen Wanshu was unaware that this imperial brother had such a bad impression of her. She only thought to herself that she would not miss the first Hongmen Shura banquet where the female lead appeared this time. As for whether the imperial brother disliked her as he had dreamed, she didn't care. Knowing the ending, all the once cherished feelings towards the emperor's brother have vanished into thin air. She admits that she has a lot of courage. Even though I knew about this dream that amazed the world, I also knew about my tragic experience in the end, and there was no cowardice. She only knows the manners and etiquette that a princess should have, and she won't fall behind. If everything is true, she will not let anyone who wants to harm her go. The next day, the sky suddenly brightened. Within a few hours of learning about the dream, Shen Wanshu thought about ordering a layout to eliminate all those who had coveted her. But she is just a princess from the deep palace and cannot interfere with the affairs of the previous dynasty. She also wanted to avoid it as much as possible, avoiding the plot of the script. But in the end, the country will be destroyed, and she will also become a princess of the lost country. Shen Wanshu knew she couldn't stand by, and after much thought, she decided to join the game. Your Royal Highness Princess, is it cold? After inserting a golden hairpin into her, Huaben looked at her trance and felt a little worried. Shen Wanshu regained her senses and gently shook her head. But she suddenly remembered what she had dreamt of again last night. She was tossed and turned by the dreamer hot and hot. The bones all over my body seemed to have softened. Although it was just a dream and not real, she was really influenced. Pulling the red mandarin brocade skirt on her body, Shen Wanshu took a deep breath. Everything is just a dream, it hasn't really happened yet, it's all fake. She will not have any entanglement with them. Take a step, take a look. Your Highness, you don't often appear on weekdays. This is still the first time since the Emperor left. It's your first time. Huaben reminded. There won't be anything wrong, let's go. Don't let the Imperial brothers wait too long. Our palace is safe and sound. Shen Wanshu spoke up and stroked her hair in the mirror, her expression calm and graceful. Since she already knows the direction, she will not walk on the path of no return. Upon hearing the princess's confident expression, both Huaben and Xiao Chui temporarily relaxed. Looking at the princess's face after putting on her makeup, I couldn't help but feel proud. Their princess is truly the most precious and enchanting woman in the entire capital city. Chapter 3. Prime Minister Pei Yingyan. You are listening at novel full.audio. Today is the Emperor's birthday banquet, and many people have come to the palace. The imperial garden was surrounded by people, and fallen petals were trampled on. The beautiful palace maids, holding cattail fans, gathered around their masters and gradually headed towards the banquet hall. I heard that Princess Shu will also be here tonight, whether it's true or false. I heard she didn't like this before. A little palace maid at the end of the queue couldn't help but say, isn't it a good thing to see the princess? I haven't seen her yet. Another speaker said, do you know that the young masters of the 4 great aristocratic families have all arrived, as well as Mr. Pei, Jiang Wanshu, and countless daughters who favor him. I don't know when he will get married. Everyone knows that although Prime Minister Pei has a handsome appearance, he is not close to women. The cruel methods of thunder, the face of the Bodhisattva, and the unfathomable smile often held at the corners of his mouth, make people tremble uncontrollably when they look at it. Where else can one still think of that charming mind? General, I heard that General Zhenguo won the battle this time and rushed back overnight to celebrate His Majesty's birthday. I don't know what reward he will have. Ah, that noble daughter in the boudoir, the daughter of the Ministry of Rights attendant, is also coming. I heard she was personally invited by His Majesty. It seems that it's really lively now. Upon hearing her own name, Shen Wanshu kept walking, but took a detour to avoid them and let out a sigh in her heart. Indeed, step by step in the cultivation field, the pen is a debt of love. There, everyone went for the sake of the female protagonist and her imperial brother. No wonder her initial decision in the storybook was not intentional. It was so chaotic that anyone who wanted to intervene was entangled. Xiaocui and Huaben exchanged a glance, glanced at the few people on the other end, and silently followed the princess. At this banquet, Shen Huaijin sat at the top with an imperial crown on his head, dressed in a bright yellow dragon robe, and had a handsome face. Staring at a vacant spot, my eyebrows furrowed and I felt a bit impatient. The eunuch waiting on the side glanced at the position and chuckled softly, Your Majesty, the princess must be on her way. Don't worry. Shen Huaijin's eyebrows throbbed and she sneered in her heart. He has such a great face as a princess, making civil and military officials and concubines wait for her. The eunuch looked at the signs of His Majesty's anger. After looking at another vacancy and hesitating for a few seconds, he cautiously said, Your Majesty, in fact, the daughters of the Ministry of Rights attendants have not yet arrived. Perhaps they are traveling together. Due to the Emperor's authority, many people at the banquet sensed a strange atmosphere. The atmosphere became visibly quiet, and I noticed the only spot at the banquet. During the conversation, my gaze occasionally turned to the door. The man who fell second to the emperor calmly took a sip from his teacup, as if he was not moved by anything. On the other hand, there was another fierce and handsome man beside him who glanced at the emperor and then at the two vacant positions, covering his mind and looking pale. Shen Wanshu didn't even know that she was just a few steps late, when her brother wrote another note. Finally, as everyone couldn't hide their eyes and looked around, the princess's attendants stopped at the entrance of the main hall. Princess Wanshu is here. Everyone's figures paused, their gaze fixed on one place. Shenyang towered into the clouds, and several magnolias bloomed all over the branches. Snow slid down and gently fell onto people's shoulders. The girl caught everyone's eye at this moment. Since the death of the late emperor, many people present have not seen Princess Wanshu with their own eyes. At the entrance of the main hall, a graceful crimson train skirt appeared, and she casually walked step by step into the sight of everyone. Shen Wanshu's steps paused slightly, her eyelashes trembled, and she lazily lifted her eyelids. Why do we all look at her? Isn't it just taking a detour and slowing down a bit? The people in the seats were all carefully watching the stunning princess in the capital. The beautiful woman has black hair and snowy skin, her voluptuous face carries a smile, and her slender waist is not worth a grip. A pair of mesmerizing water pupils filled with bright light, with a goose-white fox collar draped around his shoulders, and frost, snow, and jade white falling on his shoulders and black hair. Brilliant and unappealing, exuding a dignified demeanor throughout. It seemed strange, but at this moment, her eyes were full of doubt as she looked at everyone, which was truly captivating. All delicate and pitiable, like a pear blossom that cannot be broken. Such a beauty is breathtaking in every inch, with an extremely outstanding and even seductive appearance. Shen Huaijin furrowed his brows lightly, and a dark light flashed in his eyes. Watching her dressed so brilliantly today and being watched by everyone, Shen Huaijin felt a bit annoyed in her heart. She never likes this kind of scene, doesn't she? In the past, I either hid in the arms of my father or came to play coquettish with him, but now no longer sticking to him. This is exactly what Shen Huaijin wants to see, but it always feels strange, as if something has changed. He was a bit unhappy, but didn't say anything. Just waved his hand and asked the attendant to lead the princess to sit down. As soon as Shen Wanshu sat down, she found that there was still an empty seat at the banquet. She glanced a few times, and Wan Mei beside her gently leaned over to remind her. Your Highness, that is the position of the Minister of Right's daughter. Shen Wanshu withdrew her gaze, raised her eyebrows, and secretly glanced in the direction of the imperial brother, discovering that he was waiting for Chen Yaoyao. Undoubtedly the female lead of the storybook, she made the final appearance and then caught the attention of her brother. Feeling amused, Shen Wanshu suddenly curved her lips. But I don't know if it was her illusion, but suddenly a shiver surged from her back. It's like being targeted by some big beast. Shen Wanshu lifted her eyelids and didn't dodge her gaze, looking across from her. The man across from him has a tall and straight figure, with clear and handsome features, sharp eyebrows and dark eyes, elegant and indifferent, as if he is not interested in anything. Deep ink-colored long hair hangs on the back, and a snow cloak drapes over the shoulders, like a flawless jade. Even just sitting, a calm aura arises naturally. But at this moment, he fixed his gaze on her. It can even be said that they are looking at each other. Without a doubt, he is the youngest Prime Minister, Pei Yingyan, the person behind the scenes in the storybook. She is the person who should not have had any interaction with her. She clenched her fingertips, unconsciously biting her lips, and her heart skipped a beat. Seeing that face, the indifferent gaze like an ancient pond seemed like a desolate vortex that could suck people in. Shen Wanshu remembered those dreams and the memories hidden deep in her mind. As long as she remembered these things, Shen Wanshu felt her eyes moist and her whole body began to soften. But she cannot reveal her weaknesses. It's just eye contact, her and his lives are not yet connected, and they won't have any entanglements in the future. The girl leaned against the seat, her whole face as if hidden in fox fur. With a beautiful face, she gracefully raised her lips and smiled at the man, then shifted her gaze away. But she didn't realize that her ears had quietly turned red. The man's deep eyes froze on the girl's ear for 2 seconds, with a slightly dim glow before moving away as if nothing had happened. He lowered his head and lightly twisted the glass in his hand, his pale and handsome face quickly flashed with a smile, disappearing in an instant. Delicate flowers covered in snow are easier to fold. Yingyan, what are you looking at? A warm voice suddenly sounded, interrupting the man's trance. Pei Yingyan frowned slightly and turned his head to look over. Shen Wanshu also looked up at the sound, pursed her lips, blinked her eyes, and there was still a hint of water in her eyes. That glance was full of charm that I didn't even know. Chapter 4. Chen Yaoyao, the female lead of the storybook. You are listening at novel.full.audio. Pei Yingyan lazily lifted his eyelids, holding a white jade cup on his lips, and casually glanced at the princess before turning to the person speaking beside him. Shen Wanshu didn't notice her gaze, she only thought of the plot in the script. She knows who the man sitting next to Pei Yingyan is. The Jiang family, one of the 4 powerful families and a civil servant family, is the young minister of Dali Temple, Jiang Wanshu. Jiang Wanshu was dressed in a loose blue wide robe, with handsome and gentle facial features that were not aggressive. Surrounded by a dark black cloak on his shoulder, his eyebrows and eyes were clear and warm, elegant like a gentleman's emerald bamboo. Sitting with Pei Yingyan is 2 extremes, one with a sharp edge and the other with a reserved demeanor. Both are difficult to deal with characters, 2 cunning foxes. Shen Wanshu silently added in her heart. As if realizing the princess was looking here, Jiang Wanshu lifted her lips and hooked a faint smile in the direction of Shen Wanshu. Raise another glass of wine and drink it in 1 gulp. Later, he looked at his friend Pei Yingyan beside him and said in a clear and gentle voice. Originally, what Yingyan just saw was Princess Wanshu. Pei Yingyan's eyes drooped slightly, his eyebrows and eyes remained calm and cold. Covering the sharpness in his ink eyes, he listened to the words of the person beside him, but a hint of darkness flashed in his eyes. After a while, he spoke in a deep voice, his voice magnetic and slow. I haven't seen the princess for a long time, I've been frozen for a while. The young girl who can act coquettishly in my memory has already left the city, charming and charming. Shen Wanshu. When he was young, he even hugged her. The sweet and soft scent seemed to linger on the tip of the nose again. Pei Yingyan suddenly remembered the sudden dream from last night. The person in the dream was held in his arms, her delicate and fair face shedding tears, and her rosy lips were sucked red, slightly open. She cried profusely. Linglong's body is as soft as water, trembling lightly, and her vermilion lips slightly open. It seems that with just one more pull, it will break. That is the shadow of the princess. It was his enchanting dream, yet not surprising at all. Taking his breath away, Pei Yingyan glanced at the people beside him, and a hint of inexplicable laughter appeared on the corner of his lips. Wanshu, the Qingqing hibiscus born to Princess Wanshu, right? Jiang Wanshu lifted her eyelids slightly and narrowed her eyes. Shen Wanshu didn't know what they were talking about, so she picked up her wine glass and took a few sips, giving Jiang Wanshu some face, but with a clear smile of estrangement on her face. Wanmei lowered her head to pour her wine again, but quietly approached and whispered. Has your highness ever seen Prime Minister Pei before? Shen Wanshu gently shook her head, tightened the fox fur collar on her shoulder, and glanced in the direction of the imperial brother. She noticed that he was chatting with the eunuch beside her and did not notice her. It should be asking when the female lead will come, not paying attention to her. Shen Wanshu didn't know how to describe her feelings, she wouldn't obstruct who the imperial brother liked. But this familiar step-by-step direction made her increasingly disgusted with the selfish and shameless Shen Huaijin in the storybook. Wanmei hesitated to speak, glanced at Xiaotsue beside her who didn't understand anything, and finally held her words to her heart, gently brushing away the snow on her shoulder. She wanted to say that the way Prime Minister Pei looked at your highness just now was truly profound and unfathomable. Shen Wanshu glanced at Wanmei, of course knowing what she was going to say. It's just that Pei Yingyan and Jiang Wanshu are both looking at her, and have also made everyone around them see her. As long as she is honest, no one dares to discuss her. On the other end, Jiang Wanshu's smile deepened at the corner of her mouth, and her gentle and elegant eyes curved. My face turned pale red, and my ears also turned red. The princess's face, I dare not speak recklessly. But the next second, Jiang Wanshu lifted her eyelids and glanced at the princess across from Pei Yingyan. Then he continued to warm up and say. But Princess Wanshu was elegant and gentle, and I also froze at the sight. Although his tone was calm, his gaze clearly showed interest in the princess, as if he was thinking about how to capture this excellent and rare prey. Upon hearing these words, Pei Yingyan finally lifted his gloomy and sharp eyes. Taking a deep glance at Jiang Wanshu, her thin lips lightly curled, with a profound meaning, and no hint of joy or anger. Jiang Wanshu returned with a faint smile. Shen Wanshu noticed that the atmosphere between the two people across from her suddenly became strange. She lowered her eyelids, but when she lifted them up again, she suddenly remembered the palace maid saying that the general of Zhengua had also rushed back. General Yang Qie, a character in the plot who leads troops to break through the city gate. It's also difficult to deal with and difficult to deal with. Shen Wanshu gently stroked her temples. As soon as she arrived, she noticed the general, and the bloody aura throughout her body could not be concealed. But she didn't look there. Because it's too sudden, it's inevitable to make people think too much. Yang Qie served as the front and back of the Wei dynasty from beginning to end in the storybook, and if in the end, the imperial brother would still be punished, can she trust this powerful general who has been trusted by her father when she is at a loss? The protagonist always makes the final appearance. The female protagonist did not ask everyone to wait for long. Coincidentally, after burning a stick of incense, a group of graceful dancers gathered in the hall, and she arrived. The woman hurriedly walked, reflecting the scorching sun and the falling frost and snow, and finally arrived at the main hall. She was wearing a flowing cloud skirt with water sleeves, gently swaying her cigarette powder petal sleeves. With one ping and one step, she twisted her graceful steps and followed the dancers to the center. The woman's eyebrows were like smoke, her skin was like condensed fat, and her round apricot eyes were full of agility. Her figure quickly danced to the rhythm of the guqin. She exuded a subtle and attractive aura all over her body. Wearing a pink silk skirt, the girl was surrounded in the middle, spinning in a circle. Her long water sleeves were agile and stunning when thrown out. Wearing a picked peony on his head, his gaze at the crowd was even more cunning and obedient. The female lead of the storybook, Chen Yaoyao. Shen Wanshu went to see her imperial brother at the first moment. Shen Huaijin's eyes seemed to be glued to Chen Yaoyao, and the astonishment and amazement in his eyes could not be concealed. With a raised eyebrow, Shen Wanshu's eyes curved slightly, and a chill appeared in her eyes. Her imperial brother was also too useless, so she was taken down by the female protagonist of the storybook. So, sure enough, all directions are exactly the same as her dreams, and the details are completely correct. She must enter the game. As the dance closed, Chen Yaoyao gasped for breath and looked around with a smile. My gaze paused for a few seconds on a bright red, passing over the powerful officials before finally landing on the first emperor. Little girl Chen Yaoyao, I would like to present a birthday dance to your Majesty today. She lowered her eyebrows and smiled, gazing at the ripples. Because it was a dance for the emperor, with a graceful and ethereal posture, everyone didn't feel it was inappropriate, but instead became intoxicated. Okay. Shen Wanshu had several good moments in a row, grinning happily with his lips wide open, his handsome face beaming with joy, his eyes fixed only on Chen Yaoyao. Not forgetting to instruct the eunuch to give generous gifts, boasting about the excellent teachings of the Minister of Rites, and praising the Minister of Rites for his ethereal demeanor. In just a moment, everyone applauded and looked at the Minister of Rites. With envy in his eyes, he envied his daughter for winning the favor of the emperor. Chen Yaoyao's face turned crimson as he was stared at, and his fair neck was also stained with powder. After waiting for a few seconds, I seemed to be listening to something, biting my lips and slowly and gently thanking. This shy and agile appearance made Shen Wanshu's heart itch again. I wish I could bring her into the palace now and bestow upon her the title of favored concubine. Enjoying the admiration of everyone, Chen Yaoyao swept around. My gaze fell on the man in the black robe who remained silent all along. Chapter 5. She easily makes men develop a desire for conquest. You are listening at novel full.audio. No, to be careful, it's on that bunch of handsome and young gentlemen. But Chen Yaoyao's gaze remained fixed on Pei Yingyan for several seconds. Until the people across from her planned to look up, she withdrew her gaze, curled her lips, looked shy, and lowered her head back to her seat. Shen Wanshu noticed the female lead and found her actions somewhat strange. First, show it to the emperor, and finally, show it to him. Even if she wanted all the young elites to notice her, Shen Wanshu still felt that Chen Yaoyao had a purpose in mind. She thought that Chen Yaoyao didn't want to be favored by her brother for his hatred towards him for forcibly taking and plundering. However, she didn't say anything. After all, this farce was originally prepared for the female lead, and it was her own protagonist play. After this dance, it was enough for people in the capital to talk about it for a long time, and its charm swept the capital, captivating countless young masters. Shen Wanshu felt amused again in her heart. She pursed her lips and distracted herself to twist a grape to eat. But she didn't know how many people present were swaying their minds because of her frown. Princess Wanshu was born delicate, rarely appearing in public. Also, due to her exceptional status and prestige, it is easy for men to develop a desire for conquest. Grapes burst with juice, and the purple-red waterlogging stained the peach-colored double petals, winding along to the fingertips. Shen Wanshu wiped the corners of her lips with a handkerchief before looking up again. Why are everyone looking at her again? Even the emperor brother Shen Wanshu noticed that Shen Wanshu and he were looking at each other, feeling a little less annoyed in her heart, and then withdrew her gaze. But he noticed that Pei Yingyan was looking at his imperial sister openly. Shen Wanshu's expression was deep and he didn't know what he was thinking. On this side, looking at Shen Wanshu's beautiful and fragile face, even though Chen Yaoyao felt inferior to her for a moment, he still calmly took a low breath. Chen Yaoyao bit his lips, silently conversing with the system in his heart. No, isn't this supporting actress not attending the banquet in the plot? She doesn't like the scene, does she? System. Based on the plot, it seems like this, but whether she's here or not doesn't affect your ability to complete the task. Are you sure that Shen Wanshu will fall in love with me at first sight if I'm like this? Hurry up and fill up the halo buff for me. I'm afraid I won't be able to match this malicious female supporting character. I'll give you back the points later. System. Host, what are you afraid of? Aren't you claiming to be a self-reliant personality, different from the stereotypical women of this era? Your mission is just the son of luck, and you don't need to compare yourself to her. I know, don't you trust me after conquering all the lucky men in this world? Shen Wanshu looked over with some confusion upon hearing this. She seemed to hear the female protagonist talking to herself. Malicious supporting woman, is that her? Does the female protagonist of the storybook also know that this is the storyline of the storybook? Upon encountering Shen Wanshu's gaze, Chen Yaoyao's expression froze. He lifted his glass and took a sip, but inwardly called out to the system. She can't possibly hear us talking, does she need to be dealt with system? How is it possible? This system is an advanced product. Shen Wanshu. She pretended not to hear, lowered her head, and took a sip of the hot tea beside her. Chen Yaoyao, calm down. Oh, I didn't hear it before. It startled me. The system, please fill it up quickly and make Pei Yingyan fall in love with me. This point can be used for a long time. System. Are you stupid? Without this kind of golden finger, it's just an auxiliary function. Listening to those noisy conversations, Shen Wanshu didn't even blink her eyelids, she only looked at the movements of other dancers ahead. Originally, Chen Yaoyao had a helper who seemed to help her win the hearts of the young masters. Is there such a thing in the world? Shen Wanshu curled her lips with great interest. If it weren't for that dream, she might have been very shocked by everything that happened now. But she already knew everything in advance. She is a princess, there is no one else behind her, only herself. Ink hair fell down along the movement, revealing the girl's fair neck, slender and fragile. Not far away, Pei Yingyan's gaze once again unconsciously fell on Shen Wanshu. He felt a fleeting resentment emanating from her. Because the water she was drinking was too hot, when Shen Wanshu lifted her face, her lips turned slightly red and she looked around, but still met the cold and stern man across from her. A man in a high position has a calm demeanor in handling things. Even if caught sneaking a peek, one can still hold up their glass without blushing or jumping, pursing their lips and nodding with a smile. Shen Wanshu. It's really an old fox. Because of the startled swan dance just now, several palace maids have already started whispering. That's the Miss Chen family specially invited by your Majesty, isn't it? Miss Chen's dance is really beautiful, she is the most beautiful woman at today's banquet. I'm afraid you didn't ignore the Royal Highness Princess at the banquet. Although she rarely appeared, she was also really good looking. Didn't you see that many young men's eyes were on her? But your Majesty's gaze has always been fixed on Miss Chen, including the young masters of the 4 major aristocratic families. Even the princess's gaze is fixed on Miss Chen. Chen Yaoyao hesitated and looked in the direction of the princess, carefully examining her up and down. For her, Shen Wanshu is a malicious female supporting character in the storybook. Although she has the dignity of a princess, she is incredibly arrogant and unrestrained in everything she does, maintaining rigid etiquette. It's not as lively and unrestrained as she is. Thinking of this, Chen Yaoyao's sense of crisis gradually diminished. A stereotypical person who has been taught from a young age to take care of the inner house, serve the soul of a husband, or have a lively and daring soul that dares to love and hate, everyone will prefer which one, you don't have to think about it. So she is not afraid. Chen Yaoyao pursed his lips and gave a soft smile to Shen Wanshu. She is a traveler. Raising her eyebrows, Shen Wanshu also curved her lips and smiled at the other person. The black-green silk against the backdrop of her dark eyes was clear and delicate. The dance also stopped, and the last person finally arrived. The courtiers at the banquet came to their senses and raised their glasses to the emperor to congratulate him on his birthday. Perhaps because Chen Yaoyao's dance completely moved him, Shen Huijian's initial displeasure had already disappeared, and there was even a faint intention towards Chen Yaoyao. Everyone has different thoughts. Today, there are 20 to 5 emperors, countless beauties in the harem, but no sons under their knees. Many wealthy ministers have set their sights on this and want to offer hospitality. After all, this first child is most likely to succeed in the future, and everyone wants to covet it. But now, even though his eyes have not left the daughter of the Minister of Rights, the ministers are pounding their chests and feet, feeling extremely sour as they look at the pleasure that cannot be hidden on the face of the Minister of Rights. Shen Huijin stared at Chen Yaoyao, who also shyly avoided his gaze and drank one cup after another of osmanthus wine. Drinking too much alcohol makes it easy for your face to turn red. Like a peach petal stained with rouge, happily supporting its chin, watching the person in the middle play the piano with a smile, attracting the attention of many young masters and ladies. Shen Wanshu took in all of this and squinted her eyes. There are also the young masters of the 4 major aristocratic families not far away. During the Great Wei dynasty, the power of the world was held by Prime Minister Pei, who was the leader of the 4 major aristocratic families. And border generals who hold military power. She was appointed by the late emperor to assist her brother. As a result, her imperial brother will play tricks on the court for the sake of the female protagonist in the future, causing the marquis to be tricked, which is extremely absurd. So the powerful Pei Yingyan will usurp the throne. Ignoring the interaction between the imperial brother and the female protagonist of the storybook, Shen Wanshu calmly looked around. Finally, she noticed the boy in the corner who had no presence at all. Chapter 6. Your Majesty, can anyone really bestow upon me? You are listening at novel full.audio. That is the new emperor who will be erected by Prime Minister Pei and his courtiers in the future. Now she doesn't have a lifeless imperial brother, Shen Muwei. Shen Wanshu couldn't remember the personality of this imperial brother clearly. Whether it was during the lifetime or after his father's death, he seemed to have no sense of existence. The young boy was exquisitely beautiful, but wearing the simplest navy blue robe, with thin lips and a smile, and a pair of affectionate eyes also gazing at the central musician playing the piano. Seems to find it interesting, occasionally laughs, but consciously hides their sense of existence. Shen Wanshu's heart lifted. She thought of him and Chen Yaoyao poisoning her. If she were to take the lead in solving him. Will the female lead poison her even if she doesn't have a chance for him to ascend to the throne? As soon as this thought came to her mind, Shen Wanshu immediately felt like she was being stared at by an evil gaze. Perhaps sensing a murderous intent, the young man's gaze in the corner was fixed on the dazzling red dress, and his gaze deepened. Shen Wanshu raised her eyes silently and met her gaze. Seeing Huang Jia looking over, the young man smiled, revealing a pair of tiger teeth, and obediently played coquettish, but couldn't see the bottom of his smile. It's Huang Jia. For Shen Muwei, this rare yet beautiful beauty, the imperial sister, has always been mysterious. Since the death of the late emperor, she has seemed to have lost contact with the outside world, like a peony blooming to the extreme. Charming yet making people feel distant and secretive. No one was able to dig her out of the deep palace, only curiosity and beauty remained, circulating in the capital. What does her attendance mean today? It means that in the future, she will no longer hide in the deep palace. It's really strange, it's worth exploring who changed her. Huang Jia actually has a killing intent on him. Interesting, really interesting. He hasn't felt this feeling of being seen all over his body for a long time. Young Weichen, I know you worked hard to rush back from the border overnight. Shen Huijin suddenly spoke up, interrupting everyone present's wild thoughts. I know you just finished a thrilling victory, and everyone is present today. I agree to any reward you may have. The first man's crown swayed slightly with his movements, caressing and chuckling lightly. Shen Huijin's words resonated with the ministers present. The general is also quite old and has been traveling to the border for many years. Now that he has returned to Beijing, he can consider getting married. The emperor wants to marry the general. Shen Wanshu pursed her lips, thinking about the plot of the story. She vaguely remembered in that dream that the general seemed not to have married. Is it because the prince felt a sense of crisis towards Yang Jia, afraid that he would also take a liking to the female lead, that's why he was so proactive towards the female lead earlier? Shen Wanshu pondered, not afraid that the imperial brother would betroth her to him, nor afraid that they would mention her voluntarily. When the late emperor passed away, he had already issued an edict stating that the princess's marriage was entirely under her control, and no one could arbitrarily decide on the husband. Weichen didn't have what he wanted. A low, slightly hoarse voice suddenly sounded. Everyone looked over. That is a tall and sturdy man, still wearing black armor, with slender limbs, broad shoulders and strong waist, sitting in the seat. On that face with clear lines and contours, there was a handsome expression as steep and deep as mountains. Shen Wanshu paused, seemingly relieved, and glanced at Chen Yaoyao, who had a drunken little woman, before saying for a while. Weichen doesn't want a marriage. If there is anyone else besides the 4 major aristocratic families and emperors that the daughter of a noble family wants to marry, the general of the country will definitely not be included. Iron-blooded and ruthless, bathed in blood demon all over, and constantly on the border. Although he holds a high position of power, he is too fierce and has a murderous aura. It's good if the ladies who haven't left the cabinet are not scared away. Shen Wanshu also knew this, so he spoke up and would agree as long as he liked it. Upon hearing this, Yang lifted his eyelids and seemed to quickly glance in the direction of Chen Yaoyao. He then glanced at the first emperor and said expressionlessly, "Your Majesty, can anyone really give it to me?" Suddenly, a cautious voice came from Hongmen's ear. "Your Highness, stop drinking osmanthus wine, don't get drunk, and drink medicine later." Shen Wanshu couldn't stop drinking just to watch the play. Thinking of her still unwell body and her need to deal with enemies in the dark, she decisively put down her glass of wine. Xiaozui stroked the broken snow off her shoulder, and Hongmen casually lowered her head and leaned over. "Princess, General, look at you." Shen Wanshu lifted her eyelids and pursed her lips, seeming somewhat surprised. Her heart suddenly tightened when she met the other person's gaze. She doesn't have a narcissistic feeling that the general likes her. She was just afraid that with Yang and their sharp personalities, she could sense something from her. For them, perhaps she would be that out-of-control prey. After all, upon closer inspection, the way they looked at them from now on seemed a bit off. But she is not afraid. Pei Yingyan glanced at Yang without leaving a trace. And Shen Wanshu's face quickly darkened. Because that's Chen Yaoyao's direction. Shen Wanshu did not notice that Shen Wanshu was also in that direction. In his impression, the imperial sister would always only chase him. It's his possession, and he doesn't have much presence either. He never thought that his things would be remembered by others. And here, Chen Yaoyao's heart has already become excited. System. He seemed to have looked over at me just now. They were vying for jealousy over me, weren't they? The general and the emperor are both enamored with me. System. Really? Host, it seems that the golden finger is working. Your dance amazed everyone, and your task must be completed quickly. Upon hearing these words again, Shen Wanshu raised her eyebrows and suddenly smiled, meaning something unclear. Gold finger. Is this the purpose of being a courtesan, the noble young master of ownership? There are many cannibalistic methods in the palace, and can she avoid all cannibalistic people with this golden finger? And upon hearing the princess's faint smile, some people shifted their gaze away. Everyone saw the princess gently placing her hand on her chin, casually playing with the emanation of her earlobes, and her bright white face appeared with a faint smile. Perhaps it was because she drank too much wine without paying attention, and a faint blush appeared on the girl's cheeks. As delicate as a flower, her graceful figure was vividly outlined by leaning forward, and she smiled at something that came to mind. Looking both charming and pitiful. Everyone's gaze was focused on her face. Chen Yaoyao's eyes sank. At least in Chen Yaoyao's sight, it gave her a strong sense of crisis. Because the princess can easily capture everyone's attention because her identity is that of a princess. She doesn't want this supporting actress to ruin her mission. Yang lowered his eyes and looked back at the first emperor. His sword eyebrows and starry eyes were sharp, his eyelashes twitched slightly, and his voice was deep. Weichen, this time returning to the capital, besides congratulating your Majesty on his birthday, there are indeed other requests. The courtiers shifted their gaze to the general. Yang eyebrows twitched, and after a while, his gaze fixed straight on the direction of the princess. Chapter 7. For the sake of storytelling, the female protagonist stays in the capital. You are listening at novel full.audio. Shen Wanshu realized something was wrong. She remembers in the original storyline, the general didn't argue with the emperor because of the female lead, so the general was watching her. Her gaze shifted, but as she was about to fall on Yaoqiye, she focused on Pei Yingyan. Nothing else. Because at this moment he is looking at her. The handsome and incomparable man, who was surrounded by strangers and kept away from them, had an excellent physique. His ancient pool eyes only looked at her quietly, without any emotions, as calm as a killing Buddha. Shen Wanshu pursed her lips, trying to forget those nightmares, but a dazzling halo appeared in her eyes. The gaze made her heart tremble. Yaoqiye glanced at Pei Yingyan and then at the princess at the palace banquet. Noble and delicate, he knew that Royal Highness Princess was loved by the former emperor. The princess who crowns the capital city with her overly precious beauty is easily coveted by many fierce beasts. Looking at her now, there are clearly many mysterious things in her eyes, as well as a bit of fear after taking a desperate gamble. Like willow catkins floating in the wind, afraid to rely on anyone. Yaoqiye recalled his thoughts and looked at the Royal Highness Princess with restraint. Shen Wanshu's eyelids twitched, blinked, and smiled at Yaoqiye, pursing her lips. Anyway, stabilize first before we talk. Yaoqiye's eyelids lifted and his heart was poked in a moderate way. Everyone looked at the general's eyes and felt an uproar. With so many wealthy women present, the general had to look in the direction of the princess. Shen Wanshu held a theatrical posture, and the general must not want to offend the imperial brother. That's why I crossed the female lead and looked at her. And she hasn't reacted much yet. Shen Huaijin squinted her eyes, as if she had thought of something, and took the initiative to say, "Iching, are you looking at my emperor?" At this moment, Pei Yingyan chuckled lightly and interrupted the emperor's words. He played with the trigger on his hand, and a deep smile flashed in his eyes. He looked at the princess across from him, her eyes sparkling with drunkenness, her eyebrows and eyes moist and even more delicate. Just like his dreams over the years. He has been thinking for many years. The darkness hidden in the depths of my heart. With a flash of his eyes, he glanced sideways at the emperor, dispelling the dark thoughts in his mind. "General, what do you want?" "A reward or countless beauties, your majesty will surely satisfy you." Pei Yingyan looked up at him, his extremely handsome face smiling, but his tone exuded danger. Everyone's gaze was drawn away by the Prime Minister. The man's eyes were slightly curved, his long eyelashes were slightly blinking, relatively gentle, but with an unquestionable tone. Because she was wary of Pei Yingyan in her heart, Shen Huaijin hesitated for a moment upon hearing this. Shen Wanshu chuckled inwardly as she watched the situation. "I am used to playing with the wind and clouds." But she still needs to thank the Prime Minister. No matter what the general's thoughts are, her imperial brother almost said her name just now. Everyone is watching their nose, and heart, and their own thoughts are different from what they want to say in public. If not interrupted, then the general who won the battle would not be able to brush his face. Is it true that the emperor wants to give her to the general? In the corner, seeing the scene gradually breaking away from his control, and even paying attention to Chen Yaoyao who was not on him, he squinted his eyes. Even the gaze that fell on Shen Wanshu became sharper. "Ah!" Suddenly, a panicked yet coquettish sound rang out. Shen Huaijin's attention was immediately drawn away by Chen Yaoyao. Perhaps due to drinking too much, she wanted to get up, but stumbled and fell to the ground, tears streaming down her eyes. Her eyes were hazy and weak. She clenched the corner of the table and sat up again, feeling embarrassed. Looking at Shen Wanshu, a deep and dark light flashed in her eyes, and she carefully looked at the man in the front seat with a very gentle tone. "In fact, no matter what the general wants to choose, your majesty, a ruler who is good at understanding the emperor and his subjects, and is also majestic, will definitely succeed the general." She gave Yaoqiye a shy glance. She secretly thought that the general was paying attention to her, implying that the general did not need to worry about the emperor and was still coaxing both sides, hoping for a bowl of water to be even. It's not her fault for not thinking about the princess. If you want to be the princess's son.In.law, the general now has to let go of all his power. Will the general be willing after just winning the battle? Her mind turned back and forth, and as she saw her gaze once again focused on her, her face quickly relaxed. And Shen Wanshu was very pleased with these words, praised by his beloved woman, and Long Xian was greatly pleased. For him, he really wants this gentle and energetic woman. At that time, Yang Qi's gaze was heavy, and he focused on Chen Yaoyao's face for a few seconds before finally moving away and quietly catching a glimpse of the scattered and charming figure of the princess. A few seconds later, with no expression, he spoke in a low voice. Weichen only wants to stay in the capital for a period of time and has not yet considered marriage. Those with high status and power, such as the general of Xinhua, often stay on the border or lead troops for training. Yang Qi's words are all about obtaining the emperor's consent and staying in the capital for a few months to cultivate. This is not a big problem, even in Shen Wanshu's opinion. Yang Qi wants too little. But Chen Yaoyao seemed somewhat disappointed and didn't hear the answer he wanted to hear. System, I thought a man as powerful as him wouldn't be afraid even if he were to confront his Majesty, but he said he glanced at me when he stayed in the capital. He stayed for me, right? System. Definitely, he just doesn't want to offend the emperor. Host, you need to have confidence in yourself. We are in control of the plot development. System. Next, the emperor cannot help but bring you back to the palace. One of his tasks is to completely capture his sincerity, and neither the land or the beauty are important to you. System. As for the princess's supporting role, you don't have to worry about her at all. In the future, she will either be sent for marriage or given a fiefdom, not in the capital, and won't interfere with your mission. Chen Yaoyao. I heard that the female lead is a top-notch pathological brother control. If she knew that Shen Wanshu likes me so much, would she be jealous of me? I have to be careful. Shen Wanshu. Brother Kong, did you mean her? After chatting with the system, Chen Yaoyao let go and breathed a sigh of relief. After this little interlude ended, besides everyone giving more glances to the general and prime minister, the palace banquet proceeded as scheduled. The young ladies still secretly cast their gaze on the young masters of the four great aristocratic families, as well as the first majestic and handsome emperor, blushing and whispering. The young masters and sons also shy away from sight. Some of them secretly looked at the lazy and precious Royal Highness Princess. Their sight was erratic, and their faces were ruddy. Plate after plate of semi-cooked delicacies paired with fine wine were brought up by the palace maid, and beautiful and charming dancers danced in the midst of the crowd. After half a year of drinking, many courtiers bid farewell to His Majesty with their families. Even Shen Wanshu accidentally drank too much. He stared at Chen Yaoyao, who was drunk, and waved to the eunuch beside him. The next second, the eunuch quietly walked towards the Minister of Rites. And he himself was constantly paying attention to Chen Yaoyao's movements. When he saw her looking left and right, he didn't even see any familiar servants. He shook his head and planned to get up and leave the seat on his own. Shen Wanshu finally stood up. Chapter 8. He is also one of the jackals, wolves, tigers, and leopards. You are listening at novel full.audio. The number of people in the main hall is decreasing. Shen Wanshu squinted her eyes, stroked her hair, and when she lifted her eyes, she noticed the movements of the imperial brother, which made her laugh again. It is exactly the same as her dream. In the plot, the female protagonist at the banquet drank too much and wanted to get up and leave, but from then on, she was taken into the palace by the emperor and began forced love. Then she went crazy and obstructed them. Feeling bored in her heart, Shen Wanshu once again confirmed her thoughts and wrapped her fox fur collar tightly, intending to get up and leave. Jiaozui, Wanmei, go and tell the father.In.law next to the imperial brother that our palace is tired and we have decided to leave. And Jiang Wanshu across from her was also about to get up and leave with her classmates. He glanced at the emperor, nodded, and a faint light flashed between his eyebrows and eyes. He then came over and gently bowed and smiled at the princess. Just blushed and retreated, slowly turning around to leave, walking step by step towards the road outside. She is as tall as jade, with a divine posture as immortal. As he turned around, he thought about the red corners of her eyes and eyebrows, as well as the delicate charm of her features, just because she had drunk too much. He felt that the vivid and fragrant scene was so close up. Not to mention that the other party is dressed in red and peach blossom painted colors. This dynasty is destined to be unstable due to the people in front of it. Jiang Wanshu's eyebrows and eyes drooped slightly, and she pursed her lips and smiled, concealing the distant expression in her eyes. Shen Wanshu didn't know what the old fox in front of her was laughing at, but she was definitely very scheming. They were all playing in the officialdom, so what if they were as gentle as jade? Chengfu will only have a lot more. In the plot of the story, she has no intersection with the young minister of Dali Temple. However, in the later stages, as the heroes competed, he stood up and first pushed the female lead of the storybook to the side of the new emperor. Later on, he seemed to have become one of the jackals, wolves, tigers, and leopards in the painting. Lazy to go back and forth with Jiang Wanshu, Shen Wanshu pursed her lips and nodded faintly. Just as she turned her head, she noticed her imperial brother walking down the jade steps to Chen Yaoyao, who was drunk and alone. Then, in front of the people around me, I don't know what I said. The woman blushed for a moment and secretly glanced at Shen Wanshu before being held in Shen Huijian's arms and walking towards the side door. Shen Wanshu. As she walked out of the palace banquet hall, Shen Wanshu relaxed and caressed her head. It's already very late, night has fallen, and there are no clouds for miles. But inside, there seemed to be the sound of the people around them gasping in the previous scene. She no longer cares about what's going on between her brother and the female lead Chen Yaoyao. Looking around, there is an endless expanse of rivers and mountains, and the majestic and unwavering Great Wei dynasty. It turned out that she was not only on guard against those people, but also against her blood-related imperial brothers. Cross her. It won't be long before you become rampant in this palace that eats people without vomiting bones. The palace lamps on both sides of the palace were lit, following the faint shadows of the lamps, and the falling snow on the ground was casually crushed. A woman wearing a red dress walked on the way back to the palace, followed by two palace maids who were close to her. Perhaps Wanmei was worried and hesitated several times, but in the end, she gently grabbed the princess's hem. Shen Wanshu stopped her steps, her hair swaying lightly. When she turned back, her sparkling eyes were as bright as the full moon above her head. Wanmei, what's wrong? Her calm gaze made Wanmei hesitate for a long time before speaking up. Your Highness, just now. Shen Wanshu lowered her eyelids, her long eyelashes covering her pupils, and smiled casually and nonchalantly. Wanmei, your intuition is correct when you have been taking care of our palace for many years in the imperial palace. The prey-like gaze, from inside out, from top to bottom, seemed to have stripped her naked. Even though she couldn't see the road ahead clearly now, her expression remained proud. Such a precious princess, who can break her pride? Wanmei said with concern, Princess, but your Majesty can definitely. Shen Wanshu interrupted, Wanmei, he doesn't know. She continued to walk forward, with a smile on her lips, a rosy and slightly tipsy complexion, full of emotions. The Emperor is the most ruthless. I have no connection with him, he won't protect me, and interests are the most important. Moreover, if it weren't for this dream, she wouldn't have known that the court was gradually being controlled by Pei Yingyan. The Emperor may still use her for personal gain. Speaking so, she smiled in her heart. The worthless prince, come back and pack it together to solve the problem. Wanmei nodded, feeling clear in her heart, and then reminded her. Your Highness, the courtesan of the Ministry of Rites at today's palace banquet, daughter, may need to stay away from the princess in the future. Something is wrong. Xiaotsui nodded at the words. Although she didn't know their princesses, those who had been working in the palace for a long time knew the faint gaze in her eyes. Perhaps Chen Yaoyao himself felt that her actions were perfectly concealed. Unfortunately, the princess didn't want to get involved at all. Shen Wanshu lazily wiped the melted frost and snow on her hands with a silk handkerchief, fearlessly saying, "What are you afraid of? I hope she does something. If there is any intention to kill her. In this palace, designing a woman to lose her virginity is as easy as ever. Even if she loses in the end, she doesn't regret it, it's just a gamble." At this moment, a sudden gust of wind struck. Shen Wanshu didn't hold the handkerchief firmly in her hand and let the silk handkerchief fly towards the palace gate with the wind. Xiaotsui. Ah! Your Highness, your handkerchief. Shen Wanshu didn't want it anymore, but a few steady and powerful footsteps suddenly came from the other side of the aisle. I couldn't help feeling a bit anxious in my heart. Someone crouched down and picked up the soft handkerchief in front of the servants. Subsequently, walking step by step towards the dazzling figure of the red dress not far away. Wan Mei took a cold breath and whispered, "Your Highness, it's the Prime Minister." The newcomer was dressed in an ink robe, with a tall and straight nose, thin lips slightly pursed, and pitch-black hair hanging behind him. The distinct contours of his eyebrows highlighted his noble demeanor at this moment. Shen Wanshu blinked. Pei Yingyan unexpectedly caught her eye. "Pinch her handkerchief." "Your Excellency, Prime Minister." The slender princess smiled at the corners of her mouth and looked up slightly at the man in front of her. Standing in place, the water-red train skirt was laid on bluestone bricks, supported by 2 palace maids. And the man followed a group of palace servants behind him, looking straight at her with those dark and gloomy eyes, like a solitary mountain deity. "Royal Highness Princess." The voice ringing in my ears was elegant and deep, as if a gentle brush of dust had passed by. From Pei Yingyan's perspective, one can see the delicate figure of the young girl swaying in the wind of the lacquered night, her graceful figure, her palm-sized face hidden in the white collar, and her golden hairpin trembling slightly above her head. His face flushed with alcohol, but his eyes were astonishingly bright, and his appearance was very lovable. The princess in front of her was only stunned for a few seconds, as if she was extremely surprised. Then he quickly adjusted his expression and regained his gentle and distant demeanor. Pei Yingyan thought to himself, "Is the princess afraid of him? Are you afraid of his reputation outside and the cruel things he has done, just like everyone else is afraid of him?" My heart suddenly seemed to be pierced by something, quickly permeating like frost. Suddenly, he lifted the soft silk handkerchief in his hand and handed it to Shen Wanshu in front of the people around him. Weichen found your handkerchief. Chapter 9. This is a terrible posture. You are listening at novel full.audio. Several people held their breath and focused. Everyone knows that Pei Yingyan is the living king of hell, a person who cannot be approached or defiled from afar. On weekdays, they manage big and small matters, and it takes a long time for everyone to ponder a light and ethereal sentence before daring to do it. Now that they are so close to the princess, they are all afraid that this delicate and indifferent princess will be frightened. A few seconds later, a pure white and clean hand lifted up. I saw the princess lazily take the handkerchief, and the aroma of wine mixed with incense slowly wafted out from the cuffs, like warmth brushing over the man's nose. "Thank you, Mr. Pei, for your kindness." In the early stages of the storybook, Pei Yingyan never had any interaction with her, and she did not know this thunderous person. Now it seems that something has silently changed because of her actions. After grabbing the handkerchief, Shen Wanshu unconsciously tightened it. She noticed that there were red blood streaks in the corners of Pei Yingyan's eyes and stared at her again. Pei Yingyan smelled the fragrance and his expression remained unchanged. As his eyes closed slightly, he noticed her slightly trembling shoulders. "The night is still too cold, let alone frost and snow. Your Highness, it's so late and the journey back to the palace is still a bit long. Why don't you take the carriage of Weichen?" When the man said these words, there was no hint of emotion in his eyes, merciless and indifferent, like a precious pearl on a glazed tile. "Shen Wanshu." Xiaozui blurted out, "Your Excellency, this is not in line with etiquette." But soon she was pulled back by Wan Mei and retreated a bit. The princess has no action, as a servant, she should not exceed her limits. Pei Yingyan is waiting. After a while, Shen Wanshu finally moved a few steps. "Since it was Mr. Pei's invitation, I would like to thank you very much for your understanding." The falling snow fell on his shoulder, and Pei Yingyan stared for a few seconds. In a moment, his eyelashes lightly blinked and he let out a soft "Hmm." The servants behind Pei Yingyan looked at the princess with complex expressions. She is actually not afraid. She is truly a princess. After getting on Pei Yingyan's carriage, Shen Wanshu finally realized that she felt a hint of fear. After all, during those days, she tossed and turned under his body. He saved her, but also took control of everything she had. The carriage quickly drove towards the princess's palace, and along the way, Shen Wanshu did not say a word to Pei Yingyan. She was quietly observing Pei Yingyan. This method is ruthless, and the man with a deep understanding of the city is actually just a background board in the storybook, giving up his power to allow the new emperor to succeed. What will he do after her death? Those false desires that will engulf her are rooted in her like vines. In his dream, Pei Yingyan's actions were not as noble as those of the current Prime Minister. But one cannot judge by appearance, even if one has a handsome face, the black core inside cannot be hidden. Shen Wanshu thought about it this way, and suddenly remembered the scene later when Pei Yingyan directly wielded his sword and killed someone. He watched expressionlessly as blood splattered on him, his face untouched, just for a chance to reach out to her. For a moment, Shen Wanshu thought he had loved her deeply for a long time. "It's okay, I don't want to." Shen Wanshu squinted her eyes, tightly wrapped her fox fur collar, and couldn't help but cough lightly. Pei Yingyan spoke faintly and said, "Your Highness is infected with wind cold. Do you want to go to Thigh Hospital to get some medicine?" "It's already much better," Shen Wanshu shook her head. "Don't bother adults." Pei Yingyan's gaze fell on her. The carriage was still burning incense, and the girl leaned lightly against her back, relaxing her body. Her snow-white face was rosy, and even her eyes were wet red. She blinked her eyes haphazardly, looking at the void as if she was thinking about something, and then seemed to be letting go. Qingjuan's handsome face remained as deep as a painting, as he watched the girl pursing her lips as she spoke. The originally light color had been pursed into a blush, shiny, and Pei Yingyan's gaze suddenly darkened. Suddenly, the carriage shook. Shen Wanshu was still in a daze when she suddenly came and didn't sit firmly. She rushed directly towards Pei Yingyan on the opposite side. Pei Yingyan reflexively reached out and wrapped his hand around the soft and graceful waist of the person in his arms. The tenderness and fragrance that belonged to women all poured towards him. Shen Wanshu let out a low cry of surprise, and only when she regained her senses did she feel a slight tremble in her figure. Because, she actually sat directly in the man's arms, her chest pressed against his hard chest, and her hands wrapped around his shoulders. "This is the first time I've been so close to a man." Shen Wanshu unconsciously clenched her fingers, her nose filled with the scent of the man's body. A very unfamiliar introverted agarwood belonging to men. Her whole face was dyed with rosy pink, even her neck and the ends of her eyes turned red. Purely scared. This terrible posture that only appears in dreams left her brain empty for a while. Pei Yingyan pursed his thin lips slightly, feeling the soft fingertips pressing on his shoulder. His expression was calm, but his Adam's apple rolled. "Warm fragrance of soft jade in my arms, delicate and timid appearance is the most rare. "Your Highness, sit still," he said in a low and deep voice. The low-key and luxurious carriage slowly stopped at the entrance of the princess's palace. Then the eunuchs began to serve the royal highness princess in the carriage. The carriage belonging to the prime minister was too conspicuous, with many palace maids and eunuchs stopping along the way. They knew that it was the prime minister sitting inside, but they found that after stopping at the gate of the palace, royal highness princess came down and dared not go out. Believe it or not, tomorrow everyone will know that the princess took the prime minister's carriage back to the palace. But both parties seemed to have a particularly calm gaze when facing the surroundings. When Shen Wanshu came down, her hair was slightly disheveled, but she was very calm. She smiled back at Pei Yingyan, thanked her softly, and then turned back to the palace with her intimate palace ladies. Pei Yingyan seemed to pause and slowly turned around to get on the carriage. As he got on the carriage, the man only saw a jade earring on the cushion. The big palm with distinct joints firmly held it in the palm of his hand, wanting to turn around and look, only to find that the palace gate had been closed, and the dazzling red train skirt had disappeared. This woman's earrings can only be returned tomorrow. After the carriage slowly left behind, the eunuchs and palace maids around regained their breath. There was still a look of admiration in his eyes as he had just witnessed the prime minister with his own eyes. Shen Wanshu clenched the handkerchief in her hand, her face slightly red, and Huaben beside her thought the princess was still drunk. She casually threw the handkerchief to Huaben and slowly lifted her eyes, with a cautious and cold look flashing under her long eyelashes. She would rather suspect that Pei Yingyan was pulling her into this position-grabbing game than believe that he was purely kind-hearted. Or perhaps for other reasons. Take this thing out and throw it away directly, there's no need to keep it in this palace. Her voice was calm, trying to endure the panic just now. Huaben took the silk handkerchief, hesitated for a moment, and then turned around with Xiao Cui to handle it. At first glance, this silk handkerchief appears to be the princess's personal belongings. Even if you want to throw it away, you need to find an empty place to ensure that it won't be discovered. Returning to the palace, Shen Wanshu finally felt the tense string relax. The bun tied up on the head has long been scattered due to the turmoil on the carriage. After drinking, something like that happened again just now. She was scorching all over, and just touched the man's hand, which was also trembling slightly. Her cheeks and ears were even more rosy. My eyes are sour and swollen, and so is my chest. She pulled open the fur collar around her shoulder, bit her lip, and played with her earlobe, wanting to take it off. I was surprised to find out that an earring had fallen off. Chapter 10. Weichen can be a princess's dog. You are listening at novel.full.audio. Her chaotic thoughts made her lazy to think about where the other earring had fallen. Shen Wanshu clenched her skirt tightly, thinking that she had seen Chen Yaoyao with her own eyes today and had taken the initiative to enter the game. She probably wouldn't dream about it tonight. And she is also prepared to digest those fragmented dreams, those futures. But in the evening, she still had a dream. Shen Wanshu struggled in a nightmare. The chronic poison that pierced through her intestines, like bone-eating ant-worms, climbed all over her spine. She feels a lot of pain. The disdain and contempt towards her by the imperial brother before his death, Chen Yaoyao's resentment and contempt, and the greed of those wolves, tigers, and leopards. Everything rushed towards her like a tide, suffocating her. In the end, only the man who was dominant towards her could save her. She still dreamed of Pei Yingyan, whom she feared and wanted to avoid. Despite being clear-headed in the daytime, she was able to convince herself that nothing had happened, and she also assumed that she didn't know anything. But Pei Yingyan in his dream had a strong sense of aggression. He forcefully took off her dress completely. She was like a sheep to be slaughtered, with Pei Yingyan's mature body firmly attached to her, embracing her without any barriers. She should hate him and avoid him. But because of him, she didn't dream of those people's faces. The scorching palm marks caressed her most sensitive waist, and the calloused fingers carefully caressed her skin as if measuring something. No. Shen Wanshu gritted her lips tightly, swallowing all the choking and crying into her stomach. I wanted to dodge, but was tightly pressed under my body by my wrist. The man's big palm held her tightly, pressing against her tightly, and the proud and trembling double peaks swaying in the air. He kissed the tender and soft lips, sticking out his tongue to suck on them. The man's movements are becoming increasingly fierce. As her breathing intertwined, Shen Wanshu seemed to smell the unfamiliar and familiar agarwood emanating from him. In her dream, she was unfamiliar and ashamed. She wanted to smash him with something, but her knees were easily pushed open by the man. Even her dress was easily messy, revealing her bare white skin. I don't know when the dream will progress, but the man suddenly becomes extremely aggressive. This dream is too real, so real that it scared Shen Wanshu. The tingling feeling is like a continuous surge of tide. Due to this stimulation, the girl's eyes couldn't help but turn red and shed tears. But her expression remained as strong and composed as ever, exuding a delicate and alluring aura that made people want to love her. The eyebrows twitched slightly, and a blush appeared in the fundus of the eyes. At first glance, it looked like a layer of red rouge powder had been applied. After a few twists and turns, she completely gave up, thinking it was just a dream, so she decided to. It directly wrapped around the man's neck, and the green and shy bit his earlobe. But it was precisely because of this that she completely saw Pei Yingyan's expression. The man held by her trembled all over. Your Highness, I can be your dog. No matter what, you can never get rid of me in your lifetime. His voice was deep and hoarse, exuding a strong desire. Shen Wanshu squinted her eyes, trembling all over because of this sentence, and looked at him. But it was discovered. The man's thick black sharp eyes were like a reflection of an invisible raging fire, deep and stubborn. Shen Wanshu suddenly woke up with a start. Half asleep and half awake, I grabbed onto my dress and breathed a sigh of relief when I found it neatly dressed. Perhaps because they noticed the princess waking up, the palace maids carefully placed their dresses on the bed and couldn't help but look at the young girl on the bed. Perhaps she understood that the princess had just had a dream. Her ink hair was scattered like seaweed on the bed, and her fair and peach blossom-like face looked surprisingly rosy and beautiful. Her eyes and lips were sleeping with a faint blush. She furrowed her brows lightly and opened her confused eyes. Watching in a daze, I am actually thinking about the storyline of the script I just dreamt of. Your Highness, have you woken up? Your Highness, the Minister of Right's daughter has been conferred the title of Empress.